Today is a special day. It is a Sabbath day. We have been given a command to keep the Sabbath every week. We also have a command to observe the Feast of Tabernacles every year for 7 days. And within any 7 days, one of those days is a Sabbath day. There is a peculiarity to the Sabbath day, which is also shared by 7 days of the Feast of Tabernacles. I will begin by establishing that all of God's holy days are of great importance to God. We read in the King James Version of the Bible the following. If you would please turn to Leviticus 23, verses 1 and 2. I'm sure we have covered that verse in the past, and we will cover again after some time. Leviticus 23, verse 1, and it says, "And the Eternal spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, concerning the feast of the Eternal, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even those are my feasts." And this comes from the King James Version of the Bible. In this chapter, the Lord Eternal, through Moses, instructed the Levitical priesthood to proclaim the feasts of the Lord. Now, the term feasts of the Lord is the English translation of 2 Hebrew words. The first Hebrew word is feasts, which is Strong's word 4150, and it comes from the Hebrew word moed. And the second word, Lord, comes from a Strong's word 3068, which is the Hebrew word for YHWH, or Yahweh. So, or the Eternal, if you want to translate it. So, moed really means an appointment, and the plural of this word is moedim, and the English appointments. There are various ways to reflect the understanding and the sense of appointments. We are all here because God established these appointments, and He made up the appointments, and we show up before Him because these are the feasts of the Eternal. This feast don't belong to the Church of God, Big Sandy, or to any denomination of this world, or to any group of people. This feast are owned, and we're special here by special invitation from our God, the Eternal. God was dealing with Israel then, and now God is dealing with us, the ecclesia, the church. The time dedicated as an appointment before our God. It is said that the 4th of July, for instance, is a day that belongs to all Americans. All of God's appointments, Sabbath, holy days, and feast, well, they belong to God. God commands how they should be kept and when. And while the weekly Sabbath is a memorial of God's creation, culminating in mankind, it also looks forward to His completion of man's creation in the age to come, as shown in Hebrews 3 and Hebrews 4. The Sabbath represents the time of God's kingdom. Originally, as seen in Genesis 2 and verse 3, the Sabbath was to be observed after the 6 days of work by God. Here, in the institution of the Sabbath, it is distinctively declared to be a day of rest. And that means ceasing from all activities that we do on the other 6 days of labor. And rest, today we understand rest as we just lay in bed all day and do nothing and go to the beach. But that's not what the word rest means in the Old Testament. The word rest means cease from those labors in which you engage to make a living, to clean up the house, to mow the lawn, etc. And that's a special day. It was to be a memorial of creation because in creation, God spent 6 days to build the whole world, and then He rested. He ceased His word of creation, His work of creation, and He kept it. He rested on the 7th day. But since God is all-powerful, He doesn't get tired, so He doesn't need to rest like we do. Sometimes we work all day, we're tired, it's hot, and you just want to collapse, saying, I am through for the day. I don't want to do anything anymore. But God doesn't need to take a break and rest. So why does it say that He rested? Well, the reason is simple. And for that, we looked at Mark 2 and verse 27, which I have put in the handout. If you want to do it, there's plenty of handouts for everybody. And in the handout, Mark 2 and verse 27, and also from the scriptures, Jesus Christ was making a point because he was the one that was in Genesis. And he said unto them, his disciples, he said, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. So this is very important point because God established the Sabbath as a day of rest for his people. Not because he needed a break, but because we are mortal and we need a time of rest, of stopping all of the activities we engage to make a living. We need a time to focus on God. By doing this, our spirits and bodies are both renewed. And that's what the purpose is. And you've seen you probably know many people, which we refer to them as they're burning the candle on both ends. So sometimes you think, well, I don't want to burn the candle on both ends. But we didn't have the Sabbath to stop. It is like you're driving and you're making good time. All of a sudden, the light turns red and you got to stop. But it's a good stop. What do you do at a stop sign? Well, we just fool with our phones, we check this, change the radio station, then the lights turn green and we continue our march. So that's the Sabbath day. It's a time to stop. It is a tradition that God established for his children to come together in his presence on this chosen day. We keep our weekly appointment as a day of holy convocation. The Sabbath rest not only points back to God's rest after creation, that is looking back, but also on the rest that comes. Today, we have a rest because we are free from the slavery of sin. And that is a day, a fantastic day of liberty. Just as God freed Israel from slavery, the Israelites were not to force anyone else to work on their behalf on the Sabbath day. The freedom was not theirs to enjoy alone, but also something they were to provide to others. And if you look at the Sabbath commandment and the fourth commandment, it doesn't say you. It says you, your family, your maidens, your children, everybody has to do that. Liberty, therefore, is intrinsic in the Sabbath day rest itself, whether it's liberty from literal slavery or liberty from the slavery that results from sin, from which we're freed at conversion and baptism. Therefore, the Sabbath remains as a sign of our freedom as well as a sign pointing back to the rest that God after creation. Now, in Hebrews 4, it says, there remains, therefore, a Sabbath rest for the people of God. But what does the Sabbath point forward? How do we know the Sabbath is a sign of what is to come and not only what has passed? We know because the Bible does not only speak of the Sabbath as a memorial, but also as a shadow of something in the future. So what does the Sabbath point forward to? What does he mean? Paul mentioned the Sabbath day is a shadow of things to come. Well, this is normal. If you're looking outside and you see a shadow coming out, then you know that the reality comes after that. I mean, so a shadow doesn't mean anything more than you see the shadow first and then comes the reality. The he means that they foreshadow prophetically great things in the future. The scriptural passage from Hebrews 3, verse 7 to 4:11 is deeply meaningful and inspiring, although a little complex. The author, probably Paul, repeatedly quotes Psalms 95, widely considered a psalm about the Sabbath. And the reason for the word today is repeatedly emphasized that it is a reference to the weekly Sabbath. So the author intertwines three significant rests. He's using the weekly Sabbath rest and the rest which the Israelites enjoyed after they crossed into the promised land of Canaan, after wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And they have been in the sand and the heat. I don't know how you could wander for 40 years in that kind of weather. And I don't know how they did it. You know, driving up there is no Cracker Barrels, no gas stations, no iced tea on the road. I don't know how they did it. They were better people than I am. That future rest will begin with their resurrection and the kingdom of God at Christ's return. The author did not write this for the purpose of proving that God's people should continue to honor and observe the weekly Sabbath. The author knew that the people he was writing to at that time already understood that all of God's commandments were still in effect. In Hebrews 4, verse 9 and 10, that's the quote that I referred to. There remained therefore a rest, and the Greek word is sabbatismos, for the people of God. For he who entered into his rest has himself also ceased from his works, that God did this. So sabbatismo means a Sabbath rest. So the author of Hebrews 3 and 4 is showing that the entrance of the children of Israel in the Holy Land was a shadow of the rest that is to come, namely the establishment of the rule of God over the earth after Christ's return. And one of the things that God will do this to a holy nation, to a royal priesthood, is that Satan will be contained, and he will give 1,000 years of rest to all of humanity. They will not have to contend with his deceptions and his wild wickedness. So we see that the Sabbath rest of 1,000 years symbolizes freedom from labor and toil, which resulted from man's disobedience to God in the Garden of Eden, and the pernicious effect of sin as a result of the world being under the sway of the wicked one. We're all looking forward to that. But now coming to the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles attendance started small, and it grew in numbers. 100 years ago, not too many people were observing these festivals. 64 years ago, in 1954, in Big Sandy, Texas, as a feast site had outgrown the Redwood Building, because in 1953, 750 people had attended the feast in Big Sandy. In 1957, a huge building capable of holding 8,000 people was constructed in Big Sandy. And by 1960, 8,000 people were keeping the feast. In 1962, Squaw Valley in California and Jekyll Island in Georgia opened up for the feast. By 1967, 45,000 people were attending the feast. Mount Pocono and the Ozarks were added as additional feast sites. 34 years ago, in 1984, 120,000 people were observing the feast in over 80 feast sites around the world. I'm sure most of us were attending one of those. In 1984, my family and I attended the Feast of Tabernacles in Melgar, in Colombia. This year, just like we did in 1984 and 1994, we intend to keep God's ordained Feast of Tabernacles. I don't know how many people are attending this year, but I don't think there is even half of those who attended in 1984. Many have passed away, and we have new people coming in. But I don't know how many people are attending this year, but I don't think it is even half. How about you? Will you be observing the feast in 2009? So my message today is not for the feast of 2018. My message is for the Feast of Tabernacles 2019. Will you be observing the feast next year? And how should it be? I gave you the description, Leviticus 23 and verse 33, that this feast is to be observed for 7 days. God calls this appointments solemn assemblies. They're weighty. They are holy. So we need to, one of the things that it says in Leviticus 23 and verse 39 to 44 tells us that they're supposed to keep the feast for 7 days, and you shall rejoice before the Lord Yahweh, your God, for 7 days. And you shall keep it a feast. It shall be a statute forever. And it says something interesting. You shall keep dwelling booths for 7 days. Those who are native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generation may know that I made the children dwell in booths when I brought them out of Egypt. So the Feast of Tabernacles points to a past when the children of Israel were taken out of Egypt by the hand of God, and they were made to dwell in temporary dwellings. And that's what we do today. This day is to be proclaimed as holy convocation. The feast is not a vacation. You might take vacation time from work, but the feast is primarily a religious convocation to remember what God did when he brought the children out of Egypt. We have to leave our permanent homes or if we don't leave our homes for the feast, we need to be reminded wherever we are that we are living during the Feast of Tabernacles in temporary dwellings. So that's the message. We're doing something the children of Israel had to do. Sooner or later, something that we have to do every year, we have to leave our motel room or condo or retreat or campground. And whatever we do, we leave it all behind. One day we will have to leave our current society as we will be looking for a better age, a better world yet ahead. This idea of being pilgrims, sojourners, travelers, dwelling in temporary quarters, tents, booths, in gatherings, tabernacles, these concepts all come to mind when we say keeping the feast. Not our feast, not our vacation, not our retreat, not our getaway time, but the feast of the eternal. So, at some point in time, we were all strangers to one another, and none of us would be here unless we had come in contact with God. Now, how about you? Will you be observing the Feast of Tabernacles 2019? How about the Feast of Tabernacles 2029? I don't know if I'll be there. How about the Feast of 2039? Many of our children might be there. But I have already decided to keep them. It is firmly set in my mind that I want to keep those future feast convocations because the feast looks forward to a 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ, in which mankind will be given 1,000 years of rest from the wicked one. As a young person, make the decision right now. Decide that you will keep God's feast this year and way into the future. This decision is the right decision to make, and I promise you, you will not be sorry. Keeping the way of the eternal is never a bad choice. It is bad choice when you question, should I do this or what should I do? Maybe next year I'll be in school, I can't take off, whatever. That should not be a factor. People say, well, the Feast of Tabernacle is just a stepping stone. Well, when you finish third grade, well, big deal. You did finish third grade and you went to fourth grade. You say, well, I'm just a kid. But years later, when you get your college diploma as a Master of Science degree in astronuclear physics, for example, you knew you had to go to third grade or fourth grade, or you'd never been able to go to college. Keeping the feast in 1984 may not have been a big deal for us, but it allowed me to learn things which came handy later on. The feast is 7 days long because you cannot grasp everything in one day. It takes time. It's beyond 7 or 10 days. You may get used to the temporary conditions. But we have to leave, and physically we have to get to the feast site, and spiritually you can begin to prepare now in your mind that you are going to keep the feast. Will you be a one with a kind word, a kind prayer, the one who overlooks someone else's problems? Are we going to have problems? Are we going to have things that don't work out? Yes. It's always going to be like that. But are you the one who gives a pass when things don't measure up to your expectation? I hope so. So in closing, I'd like to say that, brethren, for all the symbolism, we need to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. 2004, 2014, I didn't want to miss the feast in 1984 or 1994. Now I don't want to miss the feast in 2019. How about you? Will you be observing the Feast of Tabernacles? I hope so. Go up to the feast with your heart filled with excitement. I will be there. I hope I'll see you there. Let's make this feast a feast unto God that we will never forget.